Hey, what's going on, good people? It's your boy James Harris, of course, Mental Heal. Listen, I appreciate all the support over the years, whether it was for my book, man, Just Express Yourself, which is an interactive planning guide for boys and men to better express themselves. So salute to those parents who got it for their young sons. Praises to those partners and couples who got it for the men in their life. Of course, to the schools, the administrative, and everybody else who ordering the book by the dozens. I definitely appreciate that. And also salute to everybody who supported me on Cheesy Date Board Games, which is a good game for adults and couples, your game night, your date night. So many interactive ideas come from it. I definitely love the responses that it's garnering. But now I'm asking for your support again on this YouTube journey. I'm back. I took a little break because I had so much going on, but be a little bit more consistent with it. I got a couple of interviews lined up with prominent people and people doing phenomenal things within the community or within this mental health space or even different authors and things like that. So bear with me. Appreciate your support. So make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And the guest that I got coming up now is
I'm George Braxton, a native Richmonder. I'm an attorney with a background in equal employment opportunity regulation and certified as a diversity and inclusion professional and executive at an executive level. I currently serve as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. Most recently, before this, I was in a similar role with the Defense Contract Management Agency with the federal government.
Okay, sound like you got a lot of experience to back up what we're about to talk about. Because DEI has been in the forefront, for the past couple of years, but specifically now, this year with the new administration having plans or started to turn things over. So if you want to start from the beginning and just educate people on what DEI is, that will be very helpful for the people who don't know or unsure of if it impacts them at all.
Sure. In the interest of time, I could go back and sort of go through the whole evolution I think I can do it quickly. Really, things started essentially dealing with workplace issues. I mean, we know that we didn't have, really equal rights in this country, even on paper, until Civil Rights Act of 1964. So we start moving forward. Well, how do you put those things in place? So you began to have some government hiring initially that basically said people have to get more opportunities within the workplace, and then you came up with equal opportunity laws and those types of things that said, hey, these things have to be equal. You can't treat people this way. Moving forward, there were still great inequities, and then we began to see affirmative action come about. And affirmative action was just that. It was, fairly heavy-handed. We are going to give these people, a better chance than those people because those people had so many chances that maybe they have been unjustly enriched and these people have been unjustly discriminated against. So we're going to give them opportunities to move ahead. And it was very targeted. And, much of that has been, sort of change because of court cases and all, and it does somewhat fly in the face of some of the other laws that were in place calling for equality. So then we move into DEI. And DEI is essentially diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And we'll talk a little about that, I imagine, is a series of organizational frameworks that promote fair and equal access and opportunities to all individuals. But it's also something that many organizations, the best organizations, have used to expand their talent pool and also do more to get the exact set of skills and all that they need in a particular position. Many of us, some of us are old enough to remember, but a lot of younger people can't even imagine how hiring worked in the world 40, 50 years ago. It was just basically, just who you're basically born with a job. It didn't make a difference. what one story I like to tell is my father, who's used the GI Bill to go to Virginia State after World War II, get a degree. He was one of many Black men who were hired in the post office to work for this specific supervisor who was illiterate. He could not read nor could he write, but he knew enough to know, let me go and get these folks who could never get my position because they were Black, but had all these skills, and they could come and prop me up, do my job, do whatever. I just got to treat them right, make sure, that they're in that position, and I would be fine. In the world today, you could not have a supervisory position and be illiterate. And so but you could then if you were a white male, and that's the way the world was then. So that's one of the changes that's happened nowadays, where the cream will rise to the top.
Okay, yeah, I got you. So without risking your job, because I did hear you say that it sounded like you have a state job or some
Hmm.
facet up within that. Why do you feel that its DEIA is currently at risk?
Well, I think it's at risk simply because it has worked. You don't see people if DEI were a flop, if it didn't necessarily work work the way it was supposed to, no one would attack it. One of the things that we hear often with DEI is that um, it has been more beneficial to white women than it has been for people of color and all those things. And I will say that compared to affirmative action, I can see how people believe that, but I push back on it, and I change the words a bit. I say more white women have benefited from DEI, but I don't know if it has been more beneficial to white women. More white women have benefited simply because um, they've been in position to do so. When you look at people graduating from elite universities over the last, like 30 years ago or whatever, you had this large group of white women who faced a glass ceiling. They still had access to things that other people did not have access to because of finances and because of race. So they were in a position that when many of the barriers were removed, they were able to benefit more. Also, just on sheer numbers. It's just the math of it. There are more white women in college, for example, and I'm just using college for these purposes. More white women in college than there are Black people in college, than there are Hispanic people in college. You probably vote more than both combined. And so, just on sheer numbers, they and on the access they had. It's about who's the best, who has the best credentials, and still looking at some of those very traditional things that we, are trying to sort of expand and move beyond. Um, White women were very well situated to do so. But when you look at specifically how many people of color, specifically Black people, moved into the middle class because of the lifting of barriers. How many people have moved into leadership position in certain places because of those lifting of barriers? You'll see that there has been a great benefit to a lot of folks. But the reality with DEI is not affirmative action. You have to compete. All DEI promises you is the opportunity to compete, the opportunity to go in and compete without barriers. And of course there are always going to be barriers. There are always going to be different things in place, but that's what DEI works against, those barriers.
So I think the guy in office now loudly talks about DEI hires as if somebody doesn't have the credentials, which is unfortunate. And I think a lot of people hear that and run with it. So it's not that somebody doesn't have equal education or experience, it's just the opportunity to be put in those positions opposed to just be grandfathered in, if you will. And I think
Sure.
with him yelling that loudly, people just assume like, oh, this person is black. They got it because they're black. No, they got it because, they got the education, the experience. They wouldn't be recognized otherwise if they didn't. So that's the unfortunate thing. Um,
It's and I want to go because I don't know if I fully answered your question, but that triggered me to remember that. And why is it under attack? It's under attack because there is a fundamental belief by certain segments of the population and an unconscious belief by some that if you are white, you are more qualified. If you are a male, you are more qualified. I do a climate survey within my agency here, and I actually, have questions regarding diversity and what have you, and I give some open answers, open opportunity for people to just answer some questions, and you get that from, I mean, almost verbatim. From some of the positions here. It's just that, you're just going, there's just a natural more qualified, that comes with that. And so what we see with this anti-DEI, anti-woke movement is basically someone just coming out and saying that, okay, I'm more qualified because this is who I am. So what happens is you have someone like Lloyd Austin, who was, a general, several stars in the Army with an incredible resume. He serves as, President Biden's SecDef. And the belief is that, okay, well, if this black man with all these credentials and all this stuff, if he can do this, then we can go get someone who's never rose above the rank of major, who really has a tangential relationship with the military, who has some fairly major character issues, but has shown none of the capacity necessary to serve in this role. But he does have one thing that makes him that he is a white male. And because of that, that makes him qualified. So he goes before a Senate made up of mostly white men, and white men put him in the position. He has proven, to this point, that he probably isn't out over skis in terms of what he can get accomplished on this job. But that is the feeling, and you see it over and over and over again with this administration, just the feeling that I can just trot out anyone, because they can fully replace these uber qualified women and people of color and all this stuff, because if they were able to do it, then I'm sure this person who doesn't have those credentials, whatever, but is white, they would be able to do it. And that is one of the reasons this has been attacked, because I will say that diversity, equity, and inclusion, if there is a victim in it, it has been the mediocre, first, mediocre people, period. But the most part, mediocre white. People that, don't have not been able to get the credentials, have not done those things, but have always been able to get access to, key positions and all those things. It has been negative towards those individuals. And that is a big component of this current administration's constituency.
got you. So to shift the focus a little bit, um, how does one create, or not just a specific person, but if you got a job, or business or any part of society to create different accommodations for those who need them. Because I think that's a lot of misconceptions too, as far as DEI is concerned. Some simple as the changing tables in the bathroom for men, like that's considered a
Mhm.
part of inclusion. My
Mhm.
youngest daughter is 13 now, but when she was born, like it was no changing tables in the
Mhm.
restrooms for men, but now I see it
Hmm.
is. So a lot of
I
people
lost sound. Can't hear you.
can you hear me?
Okay, I can
Okay,
now.
yeah, yeah. So when my
Okay.
youngest was born, it was no changing tables in the restrooms for men, but now I see it is. And a
Hmm.
lot of people don't consider that a act of inclusion. Can you speak a
Hmm.
little bit more about other accommodations that people may have misunderstood?
Yeah. There has been just an overall better understanding as time has gone on. And what happens is when one thing moves, then another thing moves. People begin to realize that, okay, if this is an opportunity for someone else, let me think about my opportunity. As well. What should I have to, what should or should I not be inconvenienced with because of my difference? My difference is I have, I'm a male child caretaker, and so in that particular instance, because I cannot go into the women's bathroom. Well, it makes all the sense in the world that there will be something there to, for me to take my son or daughter and use that. That's a common sense one that a lot of people would not disagree with. There's some would just say, "Oh, men should never be taking care of kids." I mean, and who are those people? I have no problem with ostracizing and or keeping people on the outside with those types of thoughts. However, there's some that are much tougher, that are much more challenging. I mean, there are people that are faced with all sorts of issues in their life. I don't know if the term is outdated, like gender dysphoria. And so the question is, how do you treat people the way they wish to be treated, the way they live their life, or do you treat people the way you think they should be treated? So in a society, what we have is this push and pull against folks that are like, well, you're violating my rights by me being a man and me going to a restroom and there being someone whose birth certificate says female, and they're in there with me, and that's somehow a violation of my rights. Meanwhile, that person is saying, well, you know, here I am in full male attire with facial hair and everything else. For me to then go into a woman's bathroom would create a big issue. Meanwhile, that is not how I identify myself. So how do we solve this? How do we deal with it? Well, I think one of the first things we have to consider is how legitimate is the concern of the so-called people who are aggrieved by us treating people the way they want to be treated. Is it a real problem? Is it a real issue that, you know, I've cleaned women's bathrooms back in my day, so I know, that, there are no urinals in women's bathrooms, so they're all stalls. Is there a real problem with someone who's dressed in women's attire, who identifies themselves as a woman, going in to a stall, and doing what it is, humans have to do, coming out, washing their hands, and then leaving the bathroom? Is that more of a problem than that same person coming into a men's bathroom dressed in women's attire, waiting for the stalls because we have fewer, and having to stand and wait for a stall because we have fewer, because we have, because we have your, so what are the practical elements of that, and how, and how much are people, really disturbed, and how much burden is it on that individual? So there, some challenging things. There are, points to be listened to on both sides, but I feel like we should always move towards treating people as they want to be treated, in a reasonable fashion. The question is reasonable, because accommodations must be reasonable. You know, um, Stevie Wonder cannot apply for a pilot's license with asking for an accommodation. That's not that's not reasonable. Not to say that, he can't do something assisted with someone else, or what have you, but, there's certain things that you can't be a commercial, pilot, certain things, certain people, certain disabilities you may have. It's not reasonable that we accommodate you to make it work. However, for most, as I talk to you now from a drafting chair, because I have a herniated disc in my back, so I don't sit in regular chairs, during the work hours, and I have a standing desk and I move back and forth there. My standing desk, my drafting chairs are reasonable accommodations that my employers allow for me. So, we have to look at everything on a case-by-case basis. We have to look at what the resources of the organizations are, and then we have to consider, does this allow the person to reach their full occupational potential? And that's what we're going for with these accommodations in the workplace specifically.
No, I got you, and I definitely appreciate you for expounding on that answer. Now, if somebody's in the workplace and they are dealing with unconscious bias, or a manager or a supervisor who have put them in that similar position to feel as if they were targeting them, or just using, let's just say unconscious bias aspects towards them, how will one, or how should one deal with that?
Well, first and foremost, I would hope anybody would that would be a me in their workplace. Not always the case. Um, the one thing that you can't really get any traction on is going to someone and telling them that they have an unconscious bias, simply because the nature of an unconscious bias is something that they don't necessarily know about. The reality is, unconscious biases are, something that we all have. We're all going to have unconscious bias. Unconscious biases are essentially, prejudices, or, biases that we have, that, automatic judgments that are based on these things called schemas. Schemas are basically information pools that, we bring in from not just our experiences, but the information that we hear, which is becoming terrible. There's so much false information that's coming at us all the times. Stereotypes, all of these different things. And we have these unconscious biases, these initial gut reactions are very natural for us. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a great book called Blink, that talked, that went into, how sometimes these first decisions, are the right decisions. The first thing that you feel, and then sometimes we allow, you hear the term overthinking. That's, something I do all the time. But, and sometimes we overthink and move away from what may be our best judgment. The other times we have so much bad information in these schemas that first judgment is absolutely wrong. The case of Amadou Diallo, an immigrant in New York who was, basically, just going outside for a smoke from, his tenement building, but was, loosely matched description of someone who was being sought after by police. And this group of police officers just all misinterpreted his actions based on their schemas, misinterpreted everything he did as he's dangerous, he's armed, he's going for a gun. Well, he was not dangerous, he was not armed, he was having a smoke. And they shot him, 40 plus times. And and so that's an example of, how those things go wrong. I can give you several examples of how they go right. But what it comes down to in the workplace, all we can do is be aware that we have unconscious biases. We can't always be 100% aware of what they are, because sometimes we have to sit back and break them down. I can come up with a thousand stereotypes and biases for people who are Dallas Cowboy fans. I can think of a lot of things that I want to say right off the bat, like, oh, they're front runners, they're this, and and all these different things, and just and assign an entire personality to them. I would be 100% wrong. Some of the my best friends and some great people I know, for some reason, still want to root for that team, and they do. And so, but the reality is I force myself to have that extra thought. And what happens very often is that people are very comfortable with that first thought. They're very comfortable with that first thought and that negative thought about someone. Even people who may not necessarily be against equal opportunity and fairness for people, they will still assign certain negative stereotypes to certain people, and their actions become those that are almost patronizing or it's like, okay, but it's like a cherry. No, that's not what you should think. That's not the way you should think about it. But the first thing to do is make sure people know that there are unconscious biases, and that they should check themselves for that. Have an extra thought. Don't just go by the first thought. Have an extra thought before you judge a person, before you make a decision or any of those things.
No, yeah, I would agree, man, to have that extra thought. And then I think also too, like people have been conditioned or comfortable with weaponizing that one thought, that thought that they have or that idea that they
Hmm.
have, and they
Hmm.
don't go deep into what those schemas can potentially mean for somebody else. So
Hmm.
that was a good answer based on the workplace. Like, what else can we do to assist somebody within society, who may feel excluded, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, any of those backgrounds? Like, what can we do to not have members of society feel excluded, not necessarily the
Right.
workplace?
Yeah, I think and I'm a believer in a couple of things. One is we've got to remove barriers, but people still have to lean in. You still have to if you feel you can't take on the the definition of being a victim, and or being just someone who's never going to be accepted or any of those things. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you do that, well, hey, that's how they're always going to treat people like me. That's the way I work for a federal agency. It was about I would say maybe 40% minority, maybe 25% Black. And while we had a lot of diversity within the organization, probably 40% women. Still when you get to the most senior positions and all, you're going to have more and more white males. One reason why, because most of the folks came from the military and they were military officers. And so you still, so that said something. But however, when you compare it with corporate America and many other places, it was extremely diverse. And then you would hear people, and people will come in and in my office and talk to some of my staff, and will complain. It's like, yeah, they're never going to do anything. And then I would look, okay, when I first joined an agency, the executive director, the head of the entire agency, was a level 3 SES and was a Black man. Okay. the head of all IT, for this 12,000 person agency was a Black man. Eventually, the head of the general counsel for the entire agency was a Black woman. Um, a woman headed finance, a woman headed human capital, and so you would see all these examples of people who had leaned in and moved forward. Yet you had some other people where things didn't quite work out the way they wanted them to work out, and they would just say, well, it's the system. Well, the system's not perfect. The glass ceiling is not broken. It still requires, but it's cracked enough that you can push your way through. The barriers, have not come down, but you can step over them and you can climb over them. They're not all the way up to the ceiling. The unwillingness to make those efforts and feeling like, well, it should work for me the same way it worked for those mediocre people back in the 60s and 70s that got everything without trying. It should work for me the same way. That's exactly what diversity, equity, inclusion has tried to eliminate. So we don't want that to work for anybody that way. We want it to work we want the people who are most engaged and most willing to lean in. So the first thing I tell people is to get engaged. If you want to be a part of something, you need to get engaged, because that way we can then identify where the barriers are and come up with a plan to eliminate them. But until people get engaged, can't know where the barriers are. I mean, in some of the EEO work I've done, I've even had people come in and file EEO complaints, and then we do the initial investigation. We found out they didn't even apply for the job. That they were trying to, it's like, well, I didn't think I'd get it, but I'm complaining. I'm putting a complaint in because I didn't get, no, you've got to make an effort. You've got to make an effort. Then we identify the barriers. When we see the barriers, we will attack those barriers.
Got you. So for the people who have that victim mindset, or those people who are not engaged, um, that's probably on the micro level, but on the macro level, I would imagine that people who want to see change are actively involved in change. What additional strategies can they use in the workplace and or their communities to have a more diverse, inclusive area? Because it's up to me. Like I can only do my part, so I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing and include people and be as diverse as possible and addressing my unconscious biases. So, what are some other strategies that those people who want to see a difference can do?
Well, the first thing, there are some realizations. You have to understand that change is organic, and change is fairly, you can't dictate what change is and how change is going to be. If you're looking to put in place something that's more inclusive and open, you can't enumerate who it's inclusive for. You have to make sure that what you're doing and what you're putting in place is inclusive for all. We often say, so this person's not invited to the picnic, to the cookout, that person's not invited to the cookout, or what have you. We have to understand that we want to have access to everything, then the cookout needs to be more inclusive. It doesn't mean we have to change the theme of it. It doesn't mean we have to change the food at the cookout. It doesn't mean any of those things. But anybody who feels like, wow, that's something that I want to experience and be a part of, we need to make sure that that we are inclusive and accepting of those people. So more so than strategies, because it's such a wide scope of different things in terms of, from the workplace to, I also deal with external access here at my agency, getting more people involved in what we do. But, we have to just think about it from an overall theme perspective. Now, one thing for my agency, we are traditionally what they call hook and billet. Hunters and fishermen hunters and anglers have essentially funded the agency for years. That number is dying down as baby boomers become less active. Every generation behind, there's a lower number of people that hunt, and anglers. However, there are other fast growing outdoor areas, wildlife viewing, recreational shooting. That's another thing that is in my portfolio here. Those types of things, and they're growing. And not only are they growing with participants, but they're growing with diverse participants, more women, more people of color, and all of those things. So what organizations have to do, you have to sit back and look at like, okay, if we've got, and I'm just throwing out numbers here, 80% of our resources tied to something that is dwindling, but we're only putting 10% of our resources towards something that's growing and is diverse, then we have to think internally, what can we do to promote the growth, and monetize it? I mean, because it's about business now. What can we do to promote the growth in those areas that we have? What can we do to get out and get more people involved in that? And then maybe have some folks move over who love to participate in shooting competitions and all. Maybe they like to hunt too if they get an opportunity, if they felt safe. Why do we have all these Black people specifically? Because I just did a big study of this gun owners, and on a growing number of people who are going to ranges and participating in competitions and all these things, but we're not seeing that growth in the area of hunting. Well, what's some of the issues there? Well, is there a safety issue? Is there a cultural issue? Is there a family history issue? What are the things that we're doing? So we just recently did a huge study of working with Johnson Marketing Inc. here in Richmond on Black gun owners, and we learned a ton of things, and we created a promotional campaign just to get people, to the ranges, make it a family thing, getting folks out, But here in Virginia, guess what? We don't have shooting ranges. We have sighting in ranges that are our wildlife management areas, but places like North Carolina are so far ahead of us because they have these state-owned, shooting facilities so people can come out and participate, and they get great diverse participation in that. So one of the things is find out where the puck is headed, and put your resources there. Find out where the areas of inclusion already exist, and put your resources towards expanding that and promoting that, rather than just putting your resources in the traditional areas that may not necessarily be paying off for you. So you have to think out of the box. You have to change that paradigm.
My man, definitely appreciate you. Thank you for your time. So if anybody want to, reach out to you, ask you some questions, maybe book you for a consultation or something like that, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can reach me via my personal email, which is, I go by Brax. So it's BRAK.Braxton, BRAXTON at gmail.com. And, this is, it's not just, what I do to keep the lights on. It's a passion. I believe in it. This is why I went to, it took a while for me to realize that, the reason I went to law school was to be about opportunity for everybody, and break down the barriers and let people do what they can do. And for a few more years, I'm going to be working. That's what I plan to do.
My man, hey, definitely appreciate you for your time, man. And I'll catch you on the next one.
All right. Take care, man. Good seeing you, bro.